Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Transmedia Art Seminar. This is our second seminar of this semester. My name is Magda Romanska, and I'm the chair of the seminar. The seminar is co-sponsored by the Mahindra Humanities Center and MetaLab at Harvard. We are thankful for their sponsorship of the series. Today, we are thrilled to welcome my colleague Agnes Bach, who is a researcher at the Mahowinagy University of Arts and Design in Hungary, where she leads a couple of projects, including projects on VR and metaverse. Agnes has many years of experience of working in theater and in VR and AR. And today she is going to talk to us about this new hybrid art forms emerging in Eastern Europe, and we are thrilled to have her. Thank you, Caroline, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Magda, for the introduction. And I hope you can see my screen. So I'm very, very happy that I can be here because when Magda invited me, I was proposing her that I would be very happy to actually present more about my PhD research that I concluded this spring. But then she encouraged me to actually look more into Central and Eastern European immersive and transmedia theatrical initiatives. And I have to say, like, it's actually very enriching to see what's in the area. So before I start my presentation, I just would like to note that this is the first public forum when I'm presenting about this. But as there is the aim to have a written format of it, I will continue my research. So I'm very happy if at the end you see other examples that you would like to draw my attention on, and you think that this would enrich actually this corpus. So I'm going to, the title of my presentation is mainly Immersive and Transmedia Theater in Central and Eastern Europe. And just a little bit like, probably you were wondering, like, I'm working with VR, what am I doing with theater? But I would like to mention that my initial background is in theater studies as well, in philology in Hungarian and Finnish language. But later during my PhD research, I turned more towards VR and towards the concept of immersion. So lately, as a lead researcher and at the Immersion and Interaction Hub at my university, I'm working on psychology-related research in VR, as well as on qualitative studies on behavior in social VR. But still, in the middle of my heart is the psychology of magic that can be used in VR creations, and also immersive theater is very much there. I'm also the founder of the ZipSync conference that will take place for the 5th time, now in November in Prague. Finally, we moved out from Budapest. And I'm also the co-curator of the Vector VR section, which is Hungary's first cinematic VR-focused event that will also take place in November in Budapest. And as Magda mentioned, I'm also actively working as a narrative designer and producer of video games, but also in my previous life, I was working with contemporary dancers, and also I was also working in a dance movie. So let's see a little bit what today or tonight, depending where you are based on, we are going to discuss. And first, I would like to say, after I minimize my screen, that we would just quickly go through the conceptual background of the historical part of what I'm going to describe. So we will see the neo-avant-garde of Eastern Bloc, the public sphere and its meanings, and also some examples. Then mainly we will discuss immersive theater and their transmedial aspects, and what can be transmedia in immersive theatrical performances. And also I will just talk a little bit about Signa. And I will also describe several immersive theatrical productions from the Central European region, and also how they are merging theater and VR, and also their regional specificities. What I'm going to do is always to put more like in juxtaposition Western European or American production and the Central and Eastern European to find out more about the specificities. So my hypothesis is basically that immersive and or transmedia theatrical productions in Central and Eastern European region build on the culturally subversive affirmation tradition that the neo-avant-garde performances had before the system change in the region. surely we will discuss what are the neo-avant-garde performances and also what is subversive affirmation, and it will make much more sense after the first block. So what is neo-avant-garde? Neo-avant-garde is the artistic practice of the 1960s and the 1970s that basically helped, especially the fine artists, to rediscover the avant-garde art and its tools in the 1910s and 20s. Artists started to reuse those tactics what the avant-garde artists were using, and basically they revisited the happenings and performances, but also the format of collage. And this can be, we can say basically that there was a different kind of neo-avant-garde in more Western European countries, and this was differing from the Eastern European neo-avant-garde. Very simply to say, neo-avant-garde in Eastern Europe was the same as in general the neo-avant-garde, but the artists here had less access to media, to various type of medias, because they had actually less financial capacities, and they were using performances and happenings more as their tool of communication. But even though because of this, they could not achieve their aims. And their aim was actually to tell more about their circumstances and to tell more about their conditions, but they were always restricted to talk. This is also described in one of the essays by the Hungarian painter and back then neo-avant-garde artist Ákos Birkás. And just as a fun fact, here is a picture of a performance by one of now he's my colleague at this university, but he could have been also my professor, János Szirtes. And he had this performance in 1981 at the Hungarian Gardening University. And there are many nice and very interesting historical sources on this webpage called Fortepan, which is a Creative Commons-based picture database of mainly Hungarian pictures, that I would also encourage everyone to revisit, because it's a great source also for this era of the 70s, 80s, Central and Eastern Europe. But why were the artists restricted to talk? And here it's important that we discuss the notion of public sphere, which is originally coming from Habermas. But Che Varga and Cirac were describing public sphere in their book as a immaterial platform for communication and opinion sharing, which in reality and throughout its history never existed in an ideal form of unrestricted participation. And therefore, because it's basically never existed, art historians are differentiating the first public sphere. And the first public sphere was held together by an ideological project, the creation of a socialist consciousness, and this orientation had a far-reaching impact on the forms and the interpretation of art, including painting, sculpture, film, and theater arts. What does it mean mainly? This is that artists could basically show their work when they were trying to perform, or where they were aiming to perform in the first public sphere, in institutionalized artistic venues. This means that they had no possibility to be spontaneous, or no possibility to exit the accepted artistic forms by the governing regimes. On the other hand, in the second public sphere, artists were able to communicate and about their contextual platforms. And this second public sphere was basically a tiny island of communication and creation despite the comprehensive censorship and discursive control. So these public spaces were coexisting, and they were basically competing with each other, because they were, especially the second public space was trying to offer, I'm talking now in a very abstract way about it, but trying to offer a platform for the process of communication of those artists who were excluded from the dominant public sphere. And especially these public spheres were existing in the communist bloc, but every country had a very significant difference in these public spheres. And these were the second public spheres were discursive, semi-autonomous spheres for creation and communication, but they had very paradoxical relationship to authorship. Just a very anecdotal example for like how censorship was actually censoring artists in the first public sphere. Like in Hungary, the theatrical performances were censored in that way that censors were reading the textbook, while in Romania, mainly they were watching the performance, and based on the performance, they could say a yes or a no for premiering it. So this is one of the important difference between these public spheres, and this is what basically was restricting the neo-avant-garde artists to actually help their voice to become stronger. And I'm originally from Romania, so I was having a bigger look or a wider look to how artists and on artist movements into unconventional spaces in the 1970s and 80s. And there the performance art was the preferred form of artistic communication, but because they were excluded from the first public sphere, the second public sphere could be for them their private apartment, the studio where they were living, or even sometimes the street. And these were the spaces of reclusion and contestation, where they could experiment in a more spontaneous way as well, which it's not a coincidence that I'm using so often this word. Let's see just very briefly a couple of examples. And the first one is Geta Bratescu's Atelier Rule, the studio example. And before I describe this, it's also important to know that all the artistic artworks from the 70s and 80s, many times they could be recorded only in the forms of videos or pictures that later became more the symbol of these artworks. So they were created mainly to be maintained, which obviously now has a different interpretation in our media or transmedia culture. But back then it was the important part of their self-explanation. What Bratescu did was basically, and she was filmed during this, that she was measuring the studio with the physical space of the studio with her body and created a kind of like a mental map of it. So she was walking around, she was stretching her body. And at the end, she drew a square where she went symbolically to sleep. And all of this was recorded. Another example, like how they were using their private space, was Dan Perzhowski, who I think many of us might know him. And in his own private apartment, he created this performance called Red Apples, where he unveiled or like covered all of the furniture and everything in his apartment with white paper. And he was putting narrative drawings on the white paper. And this narrative drawing was basically telling about their private life with his partner in this apartment. And it also had many intermediate references, for example, watching television with his partner or doing like daily mundane things. And all of his apartment was just really like a big white space. Another series, which is The House Party, which was actually like a series for 2 years of changing artistic expressions. And it was basically initiated by an artist couple in Bucharest, where they decided to house various type of performances or installations. And these were basically pre-programmed. And many of the artists could come up with an installation idea or even a performance, which was often reflecting on the actual regime, obviously, and about how the regime is restricting them. While these are examples of like how the space was used for it, it's also important to discuss a little bit about the ritualistic effect of it. But here I would go to a Czech example. Maybe some of you know the, not Czech, Slovakian example of Eva's Wedding by Alex Mlinarczyk, which was taking place in September of 1972 in the location Žilina. And this is already, we could call it as an immersive theatrical performances in that way that it was inviting also performers who were kind of like officially part of this wedding, but also many people unknowingly that this is a fictional performance join this ritual. It was an official wedding, like Lenarchik also received authorization for it. And after the wedding, the wedding folks basically went throughout the location and they were performing folkloric acts. And people were really looking at them and joining them. And at the end, they went to a restaurant to kind of like celebrate it. But why I find fascinating this example is that because people could join unknowingly this event, this could have been easily also something real. And they could join there as like a spectator, or they could also join there as someone who's celebrating this event. And this kind of like onboarding or possibility for stand-buyers to join, I think it's something that could feed our way of thinking how we could see nowadays immersive theatrical performances. And all these performances were using this tool of subversive affirmation. And this is an artistic and political tactic that allows artists and activists to take part in certain social or economic discourses and to affirm, appropriate, or consume them while simultaneously also undermining them. So these are tactics that are using spontaneity, which I meant that spontaneity in the first public sphere was kind of like very hard to achieve because no one knew who's on the other side, who's watching them and who's going to denounce them. So there was almost no spontaneity, especially in the artistic acts. Also, unofficial artistic acts were only possible in the second public sphere. And it was also not really possible to use irony directly in many of the performances. So these subversive affirmation are using irony as a very strong and powerful tool. And in my approach, this is something that in the contemporary immersive and transmedia performances in the Central and Eastern Europe are building up more when they are thematizing specific topics from the region. But what is immersive theater? Because I mention it a lot. And I think we all are hearing this term immersion like everywhere because it's already too prevalent. In my view, immersive theater is a separate genre, which is not the same as the general, what we could call immersive theater, because it has the following characteristics that is kind of like alienating of the traditional understanding of theatrical performances. And one important characteristic is that it has to take place, immersive theatrical performance, in a panoramic or 360-degree physical environment, where the audience members are stepping into a building or they are stepping into a floor level, where everything is just basically unveiling them in a hyper-realistic sense. It should also involve all of the senses of the audience members. And here I don't only mean the auditory or the visual senses, but also the sense of heat, which is very important, but also the sense of balance. Just imagine a performance where you are also not feeling completely safe or completely, also because of just physical circumstances. That is alerting other kind of senses in you that is very heavily influencing the way how you perceive the performance. In my understanding, immersive theater should also bear no meta-reference. What does it mean? Probably many of you know Punch Drunk and their very famous Sleep No More performance, which is based on Shakespeare. And I think like this is also a very important asset because like everyone knows Shakespeare or his dramas mainly, but it has also an alienating effect because once the audience member knew what is the ending of a possible ending of an immersive performance, then it's less immersive because we kind of have the knowledge how this will end and we won't pay so much attention to the unfolding of the story. It's also important that immersive theatrical performances are somehow incorporating what's happening around. So, for example, if there is a very big heat in the summer and that's thematized in the performance, even if that's taking place in another region, it's important that the performers are somehow contextualizing it. Or if there is thunderstorm, that is also important to be contextualized. Also, another aspect is that performers do not have a fixed text. So it's not like they are learning, but they have a very well-written biography, and they are rather talking as that character is written down, and their acts are consequential to what is written for them. Another point is that the audience can and should have the sense that they have some control over the plot, which we could say that they have this illusion for agency. But this is also important because there's the sense of risk-taking for the audience members is very important. And risk-taking in general in immersive theatrical performances is important because many audience members go to these performances to actually gather their own unique experience in these ones. Based on this, one can also say like performances should have a low breaking characteristic. So they should just basically abandon everyday social boundaries and rules, and they should restructuredly present us another community rule system, which at the end of the day could mean that there is no new rule system, but still this is like a very long process for the audience members to define and to understand this. And a very important tool is also the sense of intimacy. And this is because if performers do not have a fixed text, then they have this freedom to actually have more personal talks with the audience members, and they can engage better the audience members. And many times they are going back to such performances because of this as well. And as I mentioned, in the point 3 that the medium has no meta reference, that we don't know what's happening. That's why in the audience's meaning making process, this sense of uncertainty is very important. This sense of uncertainty makes the audience members more daring or more trying to figure out how to act in some situations. But this uncertainty can also come because we are not sure whether we are talking to a non-fictional person, or it can be also like another audience member. I often encountered in some of these performances that the other audience members, or even I, had some troubles identifying, and it was important for me, for example, to identify. The concept of uncertainty is not only important in the meaning-making process of the immersive theater, but also in video games. It's a very wide literature, how uncertainty can actually roll on the unfolding of the story world, and how the audience members are more motivated to be a kind of like a proactive audience members. And this uncertainty can also give us a kind of this shivers that immersive performances in general, I think, should aim for. And this is how Alison Griffiths described in her book Shivers Down Your Spine, which I can really suggest because it's a wonderful art historical reading, how the notion of immersion was actually always with us, but we always reinterpreted it. And what she's writing is about that what is exactly we feel when we wait to enter a virtual reality simulator or the fun fair. She's asking, like, is it something that we don't want to have this nausea feeling, or we don't want to feel discombobulated, or are we really afraid to bring our bodies in a very dangerous way that is still not dangerous because we know that we are safe? And this is something that we are bringing our bodies very close to death, and which is like basically our ultimate unknown. And these immersive experiences are giving us this illusion that we can go so close to this ultimate unknown. Another important factor in immersive theater is that it has many side concepts, to say like this. They are very site specific. They are taking places in all kind of odd venues. And as we could also see, like as previously in this region of Central and mainly Eastern European region, site specificity was very important, but it was not necessarily a choice of the artist, but more like something that was given to them. Now, this site specificity represents a special characteristic for the performances. They can often have transmedial aspect, meaning that they use transmedia in a very reflective way. And often immersive performances are called as game theater. I do not necessarily agree with the game theater concept because I think game theater requires more automatic reaction way to the audience's gestures, and the agency of the audience is more restricted in this way. Just imagine if we would interact with a performer who's playing a kind of like a non-player character. And I encountered that, and it had this very uncanny valley feeling, but on a different way. And it's also oftentimes called as a promenade theater. And promenade theater has also like traditions or like new traditions in Eastern European performance art, because very often there are performances that are also guiding through the city, the audience members. My favorite example is by Signa, and this is just Signa Kustler in their production, the half, I'm sorry, the half life, which was performed in 2019 in Aarhus. And basically all of their performances are a bit differing in format. This one was lasting for 12 hours. And other performances are a bit shorter, to say it that way. They are only 5 hours. And they are very often blurring the boundaries of real life and fiction. And they are doing this with their special type of onboarding of the audiences. And because their actors do not have a preset textbook, so they often can create this sense of intimacy. I will discuss a little bit more later about it. But just to go more deeply in what can be a possible taxonomy in terms of immersive theater, we can say that there are the analog immersive performances type and also the transmedia immersive performances type. And while the previous technological use is not on the level to create illusion, just something very easy and just something that is belonging to the set design, in transmedia immersive performances, especially mixed reality performances, are using technology as a way to create a very strong illusion. And the other subgenre is the theatrical VR productions that are using VR also in a very reflective way. In this presentation, I won't discuss mixed reality performances because there are many examples, and that would need a far more richer way to discuss them than this time frame allows us. So I will mainly discuss the analog and the theatrical VR productions. And as I said, Signa is a very rich body that could be studied in terms of like what does immersion mean in their performances. And basically how we can describe is that they are ticking all of the boxes of the immersive theatrical performance characteristics that I previously mentioned. So they are 360-degree experiences, and they are very multisensory, which means that they also serve oftentimes food and drinks for the audience members as well, but they also can give other type of senses. In 2017, I conducted an audience research with the audiences of their Das Heufolk performance, and there were several participants who answered that they had a very strong sense of nausea after coming out from their performance, and that could have been also caused by this sense of dirtiness, or this it was many times there was a lot of dirt or soil also even in the performance venues. Also, they are non-referential. So for example, Das Heufolk, the performance Das Heufolk by Signa, it's basically bringing the audience members into a town or into a house where a cult community is living. This cult community just not long ago lost their leader, and they are basically trying to scout new members for the cult. but they are also doing many actions in order to stop the end of the world, which is coming very soon, and because they want to escape the horrible effects of what the end of the world could bring to the world in general. Therefore, they have many rituals and they have many searching ways as well. But they are also were trying to convert the 40 or 60 audience members who were there per evening in order to make them to join their cult. And what was a very engaging method, for example, that every evening when someone joined the cult, his name was written on a wall, and next time if that audience member returned, they were already greeted as a cult member. And many people return to Signa's performances because they are very rich in their environmental design, and one cannot visit all of the rooms, for example, in one evening. Also, there was a very important ritualistic way how to join their performances, was that it was the end act of the performance, to put it this way, was taking place in a chapel, which was very close to this location where the general performance was going on. And the performers were singing and they were in white dresses, and they asked those audience members who want to join the cult to actually get naked and to in front of everyone and to wash themselves, and they also received the white dress. And I attended this performance several times, and in the beginning when they started to play the show, not too many people got there, but later more and more people joined the cult. Of course, there are also mundane explanations for this, that there were more actors and performers who were more daring, but it was also interesting to observe this. Also, this act, what I just described, gave the illusion of agency and also this sense of intimacy, which was also enhanced, that actors were actually having private discussions with the audience members, but very often they remembered if an audience member came back and they remembered their name. They also had this non-established textbook that I mentioned, and it was also important that they were onboarding the audience members. But what did onboarding mean in this case? It was that those people who entered this performance with a ticket, they actually were not greeted as audience members, but they were greeted as the visitors of the cult's shelter, and who were basically just seeing whether they would like to join this cult. And therefore, like, the audience members were greeted with a specific expectation of how they should behave, and it was much more easier for us to join this behavior expectation pattern than just to rather figure out ourselves what to do in this environment. After a very long discussion of Signa's performance, I can talk about them for hours. There are actually very similar performances in Eastern Europe, for example. Like, there is the Tigr of the Tishny performance group from Czech Republic. And in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, no, in 2013, they premiered this performance, which is based on Gustav Meyring's Golem. So we can't say that is non-referential, but they made a site-specific performance in a villa, which was basically taking place in Prague during the rehabilitation of the Jewish town. And the performance, when they premiered, or before they premiered, they could not complete it. And this is also a very important characteristic of immersive performances, that these can only exist when audience members are there. It's kind of like not possible to do main rehearsal, but the main rehearsals are when the audience members are interacting with the actors. Also, many of the critiques are writing like how their meaning-making process in this site-specific immersive performance was working. Like, many times it was enhanced by like an alarm or like a ambulance car that was going around them, which was not in the performance, but this way it gave even more a shiver for those who attended the performance. And basically this was about like they had to find out about a specific crime, and that was also moving the audience members to actually find out what happened. And set design was also an important element of it. And maybe just to have a very quick video about it, just so you have like a little bit of visual idea how and what happened there. I will just quickly go through how it looked like. And meanwhile, I also want to mention that it's very hard to capture on any type of media how these performances are working. And one, because 2D media, I mean, like screen is just capturing really one approach of these performances. But on the other hand, as we can also see here, there are no audience members here. This was shot more as a trailer. And once there is a camera or there is a phone that is taking pictures in such a performance, the audience members can have this sense of alertion that they cannot be themselves, but they are actually recorded. And this can also give this sense of being unsecure. Obviously, also the actors do not enjoy it because many times these 6, 7, 8 hour performances can be very challenging. So this is how the set design of this performance looked like. And I know that in Czech Republic there are more and more similar initiatives, which is very nice that they have it. And excuse me, yes. Another little bit different example is the sensory theater of Sofia. And even if they are not concentrating that much on directly per se of interpreting the cultural history, they have a more abstract way of creating immersion. They are oftentimes site-specific, and they also use very much the multisensorial senses of the audience members. So if you scroll on their page, you can see many performances where the audience members' eyes were covered. And I was discussing with audience members how this sense of the eyes being covered was making stronger their sense of uncertainty, obviously. And also it was tackling their sense of safety. However, they knew that they are in hands of performers and actually nothing should happen to them, but still closing out the main visual sense can really change the way how we see performances after, for example, our eyes were uncovered again. And I heard some very interesting stories about this, so I really encourage you, if you are in Sofia, to check out their performances. But I also have to say, like, even if they are not making direct cultural references to their history, the way how they are using spaces has often this sense of like how to work with the local history. And also often testimonials are saying that audience members and actors are kind of like merging. So here also many audience members are not sure who's the actor and who's the audience member. And one of my favorite examples, because I actually could see them live, it's a Hungarian group who they already, unfortunately, they don't exist in this format anymore, but their name is 011 Creators Group. And in 2014, they had this performance, The Room of Reality, which back then they called it reality performance. And I'm sure if they would have been aware of the notion of immersive performance, they would have called it like that way, because it was taking place in the suburbs of Budapest, in a very industrial area called Csepel, which is like a very huge area full with factories or non-working factories anymore. And the audience members who already spent a lot of time to go out there, and this is actually not a special occasion because also oftentimes Signa's performances are taking place in spaces of outskirts of the cities. So kind of like the audience members are onboarding themselves in a way. And they were also site-specific in this way. And the general topic of the performance was that they are creating a new republic. And as you can see, the performers had this very militaristic look like, which was also giving to the Hungarian audiences very strong memories of recent historical happenings, to put it this way. But it was non-referential in that way, that it was about anarchism, but we did not know what's going to be the end. And basically, when we entered, the onboarding happened that some performer greeted us, and we got an ID, we got a passport, and based on this passport, we could go around. And oftentimes I observe that this is a very groundbreaking moment for the audience members when their real name is asked. And it's very interesting to observe ourselves or observe also others, whether they are telling their real names or they are not telling their real names, and what is the motivation factor behind any of these decisions. A Croatian example, which is a bit older, is by Shadowcasters and by the director Boris Bakal. And it's actually a trilogy, and the second part of the trilogy, which was called Exposition 2, it was presented in several cities. And the second part was a site-specific and multisensorial performance that was based on Kafka's Trial. And the fiction meted here reality, and it was based on the recollections of audience members that the director himself greeted them and was talking a lot, and he was mixing the fictional and reality elements. And often he referred to cultural historical notions. Obviously, Kafka is a very nice way how to refer to our cultural history. And this I wanted to bring as an example because previously I mentioned that in Eastern Europe, the promenade theater aspect of immersive theater is something that was very prevalent. I also remember when I was in high school in the Timișoara in Romania, we had performances that were taking place on trams. So this was a very used format as well. And it naturally evolved into a more multisensorial way. The conclusion about the analog immersive performances in Central and Eastern Europe is that they are really deeply rooted in the neo-avant-garde practices, mainly that they are using those communication strategies that also the neo-avant-garde performers, so they are using the spontaneity, they are ironic oftentimes, they are trying to communicate non-verbally messages that are also sometimes hard to convey into language-based messages. They are often working, or mainly working, with historical and cultural history issues. And this is also most probably because there are still many issues that were under-discussed or undercovered, or there are many traumas that need more platform to have an open discussion about it. So these are more fed by this. But oftentimes they are also adaptations because it's easier to talk through an adaptive way of performing than to build up a whole story world. And it's also important to mention that as we could see, like with Signa, or as you can imagine, it's also very heavy budget required such performance to stage. So therefore, also with different financial capacities, the sense of immersion is also sometimes harder to achieve. So one has to be very creative in using this. And just briefly to discuss a little bit theatrical VR productions. And as I said, like I would also to put in juxtaposition VR performances from Western countries, also from US, also from mainly from US, and also what in the Central and Eastern Europe we have is one is the Tempest, which probably some of you have heard. And this was available as a live performance as well on Oculus App Store. So one could buy a ticket in the App Store as like basically going to a general ticket office. And it was a performance that was always announced a bit earlier, like 2 or 3 weeks advance. And those who had access to Oculus Quest could buy a ticket and could visit this on a bespoke app. And this was also an adaptation of Shakespeare. And the audience members were very restricted of what kind of tools they could use, so they could not talk. They could just do this with their hands. And they were mainly like prompted or controlled by the main performer how to revisit the various scenes of the drama. And basically, the most playful element in this performance was that I could play with various objects and I could try to be the more misbehaving audience member, which gave me this sense of like being in a risk. So I was previously talking in analog performances what risk could mean. So in VR, this is one of the risky things that some misbehaving audience members would try out. And I will also say why I think this is it like this. And the other one is the Welcome to Respite, which is a Ferryman collective and co-act performance. And this resembles more in its mechanics to an analog immersive performance, meaning that one of the audience members becomes the VIP performer and can become the main protagonist boy who has some mental health issues. And he's guided by his parents, by two performers, and the other audience members are there as invisible audience members, and they have to help this young boy to face his mental health issue challenges in more abstract ways. It's very interesting to see here how an audience member is put into a digital 3D digital avatar of a performer, of a protagonist, and how one can actually start to feel good or start to feel spontaneous in this role, and how other audience members feel less comfortable with this way. I have to say that the actors are really focusing on that they can unfold the story, but it's also nice to see on the actors and performance side, this performers side, this risk-taking aspect. To juxtapose this, the Dream Adoption Society was also working and is also working a lot with the VR. And one of their performance was built on Antonin Artaud, which I find very, unfortunately, I couldn't see this, but I think it's a very unique way of how to re-evaluate Artaud's work and how his theatrical concepts could be reinterpreted in VR. And I ask you to actually check it out online, this performance, because it's actually re-questioning the sense of cruelty and the notion of cruelty and what in VR could mean that. Because as we know in VR, we are in a safe space because we can just drop it anytime, the headset. But the other performance, which is a more recent one, is entitled Black, and it's taking place in VR chat. So it's also very site-specific. And it's based on Zola's Germinal. And you can watch actually a whole recording of the performance on video sharing platforms. And it's basically rediscussing the relationship between the working class and the bourgeois. So it's really based on Germinal. But the whole aesthetics and also in the reinterpretation of Artaud's work in VR, it's very interesting to see their view on aesthetics. And it's very hard to define in VR how much of the aesthetics is controlled by the actual authoring tools and how much is controlled by the creators. And this is also obviously very heavily defined by the financial and other capacities what the artist could put in. So in their performances, a more rough visual way can be observed, which is also adding to the irony of the topics that they discuss. But it's also adding a bit more to this Eastern European way of seeing VR art and all type of digital arts, if one can say this. So they are continuously active. But on the other hand, I have to say, like, there are also less other examples to study via theatrical performance in this area. And that's also just going back to the financial capacities and also the artist's lack of not having time to actually learn what these technologies are capable of and how this can enhance actually their artistic and communication practices. But what should be more emphasized when using VR is that actually it has a very strong social aspect, especially when using VR chat, because VR chat has this growing community and many theater makers are using actually VR chat to create new type of performances. And they also can have this community ritual effect, like visiting performance in VR. What should be more enhanced is the spatial open world structure of these performances and also the attention guiding mechanisms. What I said about the Ferryman's collective performance, where the performers were the adults, were the parents of the young boy, they really had to rely on their improvisation skill. Also, I have seen other via chat-based performances where the audience members were not muted by default, and therefore they had also this possibility to misbehave and to talk back to the actors. And it's also very important to see like how, even though there is this technological alienation or technologically enhanced alienation between the performer and the audience member, this anonymity is making the audience members more brave to actually act, but it can also have a very strong, it can also give us a very strong sense about the performing tools and the improvisational tools of the actors who from behind the 3D digital avatar can actually still create boundaries and borders of a more traditional way seen performance in VR chat. So just a couple of readings if you are interested in the art historical or performance historical notions in Eastern Europe. But these are just really just a handful of books. There are much more. And thank you very much for your attention. And I'm looking forward to your questions.
Right. Thank you so much, Agnes, for this introduction to Eastern European transmedia and immersive theater. Anybody has any questions? If you do, please raise your hand or just let me know and I will unmute you. Hold on, let me just check to make sure that nobody's asking. Or you can just type your question also in the chat. Feel free to do so. I do have a question actually. What do you think is the trend? Like, where is this kind of VR theater or hybrid theater, digital theater, all sorts of technological innovations of the last couple of years? Where does the trend develops in Eastern Europe? Like, is there a specific style? Is there a specific way that people are, trying to develop those art forms that you notice? And what's possibly the future might look like?
Thank you. Very good question. And I have to say that I don't see a specific trend in this region neither, just beside that what I mentioned, that it's more based on the local cultural history. So that's always a reoccurring subject of how to work on our cultural history and how to reinterpret it. But I think in general there is a very big fluidity of talking about performances that are using new technologies between how they go sometimes from object theater back to not back or to technologically enabled theater, but also like how, because of the lack of financial capacities, how actually actors are also going back to the very small scale, micro, but very analog way of performances. So there are all these trends that is very hard to observe because it's also very dispersed everywhere. So basically, when gathering examples for this performance and trying to analyze them, there is always this question of, is everything documented? Can I find everything? Can I really actually make this map, like also, which can also look forward or not? And it's very hard to, that's why it's very hard to answer this.
We all know, pandemic had a huge impact on this. Did you notice any particular trends that pandemic has steered? I mean, it accelerated a lot of experimentation, particularly in the area of digital theater. Do you see those things permanently? being implemented in Eastern European theater? Or, I mean, we see that in, in the West, it's, some of it stays, but a lot of those innovations are no longer being pursued. Do we see any sort of indication that that's not the case in Eastern Europe, or are people like moving away from that and just, not necessarily taking advantage of what pandemic has offered, that sort of acceleration of those trends?
Yeah, I think you basically answered it. What I see is that it didn't really stay with us. However, I have to say, like, all the VR chat performances are mainly emerged, not all of them, emerged during this era, to call it this way, the pandemic. And this was also because there was also this technological kind of like advancement that the more reachable and accessible VR headsets were also kind of getting prevalent in that year. So therefore, people could actually use more VR, or were using more VR, and they could also, the creators who had access to this and who also had knowledge, or who had friends or acquaintances who knew how this technology is working, they were working with it. And I really, really appreciate this kind of aspect and this kind of way of working with new technology, because I think there is a lot of speculation what VR could be and how it is the empathy machine or how it is not. But once we put the theatrical frames of like what physicality means, what presence means in VR, and how we daydream about it and how it actually works, it can actually create new ways of thinking about it, and basically basically letting go away like Bazin concepts of the total cinema myth and other myths, and basically look at what actually this technology can do. And I think this was also thanks to COVID that it got more in our way of thinking about technology in terms of performing arts.
Michaela has a question. Whether do you follow dance theater and how they use new technologies? Do you know any examples from Eastern Europe? There is still much to uncover regarding movement, co-presence, and synchronicity in VR, and I suppose dance is a good outlet to test some of those technologies. Do you know of any examples, and like, what's your take on the role of dance and emerging technologies?
Oh, hello, Michaela. Thank you very much for your question. And it's a tricky one. And I was, hi. Nice to see you. It's a tricky one because I should have mentioned that I deliberately don't discuss dance and VR, because I think that's a whole different territory, as you also mentioned, to learn about physicality. And what I'm more focusing is like how to give narrative, how to actually explain narrative in it. So no, I don't do my research on dance and VR, but I know some examples, and especially there is one example from Slovakia, and I just don't want to say now the name, but I'm sure that maybe you know them. So if you know them, then I would like to ask you to type it in chat, because there was like 4 years ago a very advanced theatrical performance, dance performance that was in VR. I'm really sorry. I would like to ask also other participants who are from Slovakia to maybe type in the chat. But yeah, I will remember and I will write to you. And I also see that there are also other examples, but I do not have, I don't study them because I think I don't have the correct tools to understand more physicality. I will ask. Yes, thank you, Samuel. It's already there. There is the dust. So that's something that was in that year when it was developed, it was really heavily technologically advanced. But I think many phenomenological studies are also needed to understand better dance. So I'm really sorry that I can't answer, but your question is very good. Thank you very much. Nice to see you.
Agnes, what do you think there is sort of is there any historical specificity, or how does the type of performance respond to the present moment? And also, you know, a kind of a history of Eastern Europe. Is it trying to comment, or is it trying to be part of the national discourses, or do you think it exists as a kind of outside of those discourses?
It was very hard to find examples of what are actually using VR as an incorporated way. So therefore, I would not draw conclusions in that way. And I think like even if you draw conclusions, then it can't be made as a regional specific because often these teams are interdisciplinary and they are living all around the world, and they might be established in Eastern Europe, or they might be established in other parts of the world. And then I think this whole notion is already like mixing around. So I would not really say such a very strong opinion on this. However, I brought in the Dream Adoption Society because I think I still have to learn and analyze their performances better. But there is something that for me talks very strong as a local color, to put it this way, what we can call in virtual reality local color, but it has something that I think it's worth to be analyzed more. Thank you.
Does anybody else have a question for Agnes about this topic? Agnes, can you tell us what's next for you in terms of your research?
Oh, my research is now complete. In these terms, is that I would like to create a more enhanced theoretical framing for what, with the help of my colleagues from the region, we gathered, and to really understand whether my hypothesis can be proven or not. I have this hunch that it can be proven. But in general, in my research and with our colleagues, we are working on various types of use cases of VR in psychological and well-being oriented ways. So we did a research on how young adults are dating in VR chat and what are their behavioral methods, to put it this way. And now we are continuing this research also on mental health and how is it affecting. These are all qualitative studies. But yeah, I was not prepared for these questions. I'm sure that there will be also many other ways.
Didn't mean to put you on the spot. Just wanted to sort of, you know, see what's coming up. If there are no other questions, I wanted to.
Sorry, I think Debbie also asked something.
Yeah, Debbie asked about dance and.
Yeah, I think this is also partially answering to Michaela's questions.
Yeah,
if I'm correct. Sorry. Yes, I just saw this bigger chunk of text.
So thank you so much, Agnes, for for joining us in our seminar series. I wanted to also thank again Mahindra Humanities Center and MetaLab at Harvard for co-sponsoring our series, and I invite everyone to join us in the future lectures or to view the past lectures at Mahindra Humanities Center website. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.